November 23, 1944, 5:47 a.m. Camp McCain, Mississippi. Oberkreiter Klaus Muller pressed his face against the cold mesh of the prison camp fence, watching American trucks roll through the main gate in numbers that defied comprehension. The convoy stretched beyond the horizon, each vehicle loaded with supplies that represented more food than his entire Wehrmacht unit had seen in 3 months of retreat across France. Muller's weathered hands couldn't hide the tremor that ran through them as he counted the vehicles. Through the morning mist, he witnessed something that contradicted everything German propaganda had told him about American rationing and resource shortages. What Muller didn't know, what none of the 3,400 German prisoners at Camp McCain could have imagined, was that they were about to experience the most psychologically devastating moment of their captivity. The mathematics of American abundance were already calculated in the massive refrigeration units being unloaded from those trucks. Each vehicle carried enough fresh meat to feed a German regiment for a week, yet this was merely the preparation for a single holiday meal at one American POW camp among hundreds scattered across the United States. The refrigerated trucks represented the pinnacle of American logistics technology. Each Studebaker 6x6 transport could carry 2.5 tons of fresh produce, maintained at precisely 34 degrees Fahrenheit by diesel-powered cooling units that consumed more fuel per day than a German panzer tank received per week. While German forces had spent 4 years perfecting the art of survival on horse meat and black bread, Americans had created an industrial food distribution system that delivered fresh turkey, cranberry sauce, and butter across thousands of miles without spoilage. Among the 127 German officers that morning were men who would become symbols of Wehrmacht competence and Prussian military tradition. But on November 23, 1944, they were malnourished prisoners facing their first American Thanksgiving, about to discover that everything they believed about wartime sacrifice and rationing was uniquely German. Major Heinrich Stolz, former commander of the 12th Panzer Division's Logistics Corps, watched the unloading process with the trained eye of a professional quartermaster, mentally calculating supply requirements and distribution efficiency. This story is about how American industrial capacity defeated German military tradition, how abundance merged into overwhelming psychological superiority, and how hardened Wehrmacht veterans turned to weeping as they discovered what American rationing could produce. The tears that would flow in the Camp McCain mess hall that afternoon represented more than gratitude for food. They marked the moment when German military pride finally understood the true scale of American power, measured not in tanks or aircraft, but in the ability to serve fresh turkey dinner to enemy prisoners, while American forces advanced on 3 fronts simultaneously. Klaus Muller had earned his credentials the hard way, surviving 3 years of Wehrmacht logistics operations across North Africa, Sicily and the Norman coast. As a supply sergeant in Rommel's Afrika Korps, he had witnessed the legendary German efficiency in action, watching his unit maintain operational capability with captured British rations and salvaged Italian equipment. His notebook, confiscated upon capture but later returned by American authorities, contained detailed records of German supply innovations that had kept the Desert Fox fighting for 2 years with minimal support from Berlin. What Mueller believed about American capabilities had been shaped by German intelligence reports that painted a nation struggling with rubber shortages, gasoline rationing, and industrial conversion problems. Wehrmacht briefing papers, distributed as recently as September 1944, described American forces as well-equipped but dependent on vulnerable supply lines, with limited capacity for sustained operations away from major ports. The 600-page German analysis of American industrial capacity, captured by Allied forces in Tunisia, revealed systematic underestimation of American production figures by factors of 3 to 5 across all major categories. Mueller's previous encounters with American forces had reinforced these preconceptions. During the retreat from Saint-Lô, his unit had overrun a temporary American supply depot that contained exactly what German intelligence predicted: canned rations, processed foods, and standardized equipment that reflected mass production efficiency, but suggested limited variety and resource constraints. The American K rations his unit had captured contained meat and vegetable portions that, while nutritious, were clearly designed for extended storage and efficient distribution rather than quality or abundance. Major Stolz brought even more impressive credentials to his assessment of American logistics capabilities. A graduate of the prestigious Prussian Staff College, Stolz had commanded supply operations for an entire panzer division, coordinating fuel, ammunition, and food distribution for 15,000 men and 400 armored vehicles across 200 kilometers of active front line. His expertise in military logistics was recognized throughout the Wehrmacht, and his pre-war work with German industrial cartels had given him intimate knowledge of production capabilities, resource allocation, and the mathematical realities of wartime supply management. Both men had witnessed the gradual deterioration of German supply capabilities since 1943, but they attributed this decline to strategic bombing, partisan activities, and the strain of fighting on multiple fronts. Their professional analysis suggested that all combatant nations faced similar resource constraints, that American abundance was largely propaganda, and that the massive quantities of American equipment flooding European battlefields represented unsustainable production that would inevitably lead to shortages, quality problems, and logistical collapse. The concept that America could simultaneously support global military operations while maintaining domestic abundance was beyond their professional comprehension. The first truck contained 847 fresh turkeys, each weighing between 18 and 22 pounds, transported 1,200 miles from processing facilities in Iowa, while maintaining perfect refrigeration throughout the journey. The Studebaker 6x6 refrigerated transport represented American engineering innovation that German logistics officers had never imagined possible. The truck's Hercules JXD6 engine generated sufficient power to operate both the vehicle and its refrigeration system simultaneously, while the insulated cargo compartment maintained temperature variations of less than 2 degrees across the entire load, ensuring that turkeys delivered to Camp McCain met the same freshness standards as those served in New York restaurants. The scale of the operation defied German understanding of military logistics. Each turkey represented approximately 4.2 pounds of processed grain, 847 gallons of fresh water, and 18 man-hours of labor from farm to processing facility. The total caloric value of the turkey shipment alone exceeded 2.8 million calories, enough to sustain the entire prisoner population of Camp McCain for 4 days at standard German military rations. Yet this represented merely the protein component of a single meal, served to enemy prisoners, while American forces simultaneously conducted major offensive operations in the Philippines, France, and Italy. The second and third trucks revealed the true scope of American agricultural abundance. Fresh cranberries from Massachusetts bogs, sweet potatoes from North Carolina farms, green beans from California valleys, and butter from Wisconsin dairies arrived in quantities that demonstrated America's ability to transport perishable goods across continental distances without spoilage. The cranberry sauce alone represented 340 pounds of fresh fruit, processed with white sugar at a time when German civilians received 50 grams of ersatz sweetener per month through rationing cards. The refrigeration technology shocked German logistics experts who had spent years developing techniques for preserving food without electrical power. Each American truck carried a diesel-powered cooling system that consumed 12 gallons of fuel per day while maintaining precise temperature control. The fuel consumption of Camp McCain's food preservation systems exceeded the total fuel allocation for an entire German infantry regiment. Yet American authorities operated these systems casually, as standard equipment for routine supply operations, without apparent concern for fuel economy or resource conservation. The butter shipment revealed perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect of American abundance. Fresh, salted butter from Wisconsin dairy cooperatives arrived in 50-pound blocks, each block representing the cream from approximately 400 gallons of whole milk. German prisoners, who had not seen real butter since 1941, watched American guards handle these blocks of dairy fat with casual indifference. The total butter delivery to Camp McCain for a single meal exceeded the annual butter ration for 2,000 German civilians under the Reich Food Estate allocation system established by Herbert Back in 1942. By 10:30 a.m., the full magnitude of the Thanksgiving preparation became visible to the German prisoners. The camp's American cooks, led by Mess Sergeant Ralph Davidson from Iowa, began processing food quantities that exceeded the combined rations of an entire German Army Corps. Davidson's team of 23 American soldiers worked with industrial-grade kitchen equipment that could process 4,000 pounds of turkey, 800 pounds of potatoes, and 200 gallons of gravy in a single afternoon. The steam-powered potato peeling machines alone represented more sophisticated food processing technology than existed in most German cities. The arithmetic became impossible to ignore. Camp McCain's Thanksgiving meal would consume 3,400 pounds of turkey, representing approximately 14,000 man-hours of agricultural labor and 1.7 million pounds of grain and feed. The Cranberry source required 450 pounds of white sugar, a quantity that exceeded the monthly sugar allocation for 18,000 German civilians. Each prisoner would receive approximately 1 pound of turkey meat, 3 times the protein content of standard German military rations for an entire week. The psychological impact of these calculations devastated German prisoners who had spent years accepting shortages as the inevitable cost of total war. Major Stoltz performed detailed mental calculations based on his logistics training, comparing American abundance with German supply realities. The fresh vegetables being prepared for Camp McCain's Thanksgiving dinner represented more agricultural diversity than German civilians had seen since 1940. Green beans, corn, carrots and onions arrived from farms across the American Midwest, transported thousands of miles to serve enemy prisoners in Mississippi. The transportation cost alone exceeded the total budget for feeding a German infantry battalion for 6 months under Wehrmacht supply allocations established in 1943. The dairy products revealed the most shocking disparity. Fresh milk, cream, and butter arrived at Camp McCain in quantities that German agricultural experts considered impossible to produce. American dairy cows, maintained on abundant grain feed and scientific breeding programs, produced milk yields that exceeded German cattle production by factors of 4 to 1. The cream used for Camp McCain's Thanksgiving meal represented the output of approximately 200 dairy cows for 1 week, yet this was considered normal provision for a routine holiday meal at a single POW facility, among hundreds operated by American authorities. The bread production demonstrated American wheat abundance that contradicted every German assumption about agricultural limitations. Fresh white bread, baked in massive institutional ovens, emerged in quantities sufficient to provide each prisoner with 8 ounces of wheat bread made from processed flour that retained none of the sawdust, potato starch, or ersatz ingredients that had characterized German bread since 1942. The wheat content of Camp McCain's Thanksgiving bread exceeded the grain allocation for 5,000 German civilians under the rationing system administered by the Reich Ministry of Food and Agriculture. At precisely 11:45 a.m., Obergefreiter Müller experienced what he later described as the moment my understanding of the war collapsed completely. Standing in formation for the pre-meal prisoner count, he watched American guards distribute paper napkins with casual abundance that demonstrated resource availability beyond German comprehension. Each napkin represented processed wood pulp, bleaching chemicals, and manufacturing capacity that German authorities would have allocated to military production. Yet Americans produced decorative paper products for enemy prisoners, while simultaneously manufacturing sufficient aircraft, tanks, and ammunition to supply offensive operations on 5 continents. The contrast with German military rations became unbearably clear as prisoners observed American preparation techniques. Wehrmacht field kitchens, which Müller had considered models of efficiency, typically served meals consisting of 200 grams of black bread, 125 grams of preserved meat or ersatz protein, and 500 milliliters of soup made from dehydrated vegetables and bone meal. The protein content of a standard German military ration totaled approximately 45 grams per day, while Camp McCain's Thanksgiving meal would provide each prisoner with over 200 grams of high-quality animal protein in a single sitting. Major Stoltz's professional analysis revealed resource disparities that challenged fundamental German assumptions about wartime economics. American forces consumed fresh coffee, processed white sugar, and dairy products as standard rations while conducting global military operations that required unprecedented logistical support. German forces had eliminated coffee from military rations in 1942, substituted ersatz sweeteners for sugar in 1941, and had not seen fresh dairy products since the invasion of Poland. Yet American production capacity simultaneously supplied luxury foods to combat units and abundant meals to prisoner populations. The transportation infrastructure supporting Camp McCain's food delivery demonstrated American capabilities that rendered German logistics obsolete. Fresh produce arrived from California farms 2,000 miles away, dairy products from Wisconsin facilities 800 miles distant, and processed foods from industrial centers across the American heartland. The fuel consumption for transporting Camp McCain's Thanksgiving meal exceeded the monthly gasoline allocation for the entire German Afrika Korps during its peak operations in 1942. American authorities operated this supply system casually, as routine peacetime commerce adapted for military purposes. The personnel requirements revealed another devastating comparison. American mess operations at Camp McCain employed 23 soldiers supported by industrial kitchen equipment, electric power, and unlimited water supplies to feed 3,400 prisoners with restaurant-quality meals. Equivalent German operations required 60 soldiers working with wood-fired stoves, hand-operated equipment, and strictly rationed ingredients to provide subsistence-level nutrition for similar numbers. American productivity advantages extended beyond industrial manufacturing into every aspect of military support operations, creating overwhelming superiority in resource utilization and personnel efficiency. At 12:30 p.m., the mess hall doors opened, and German prisoners entered a space that fundamentally challenged their understanding of wartime reality. The aroma of roasted turkey, seasoned with herbs and spices that had disappeared from German kitchens in 1940, created an olfactory shock that triggered involuntary emotional responses. Oberkirchreiter Müller later wrote in his diary, "The smell hit us like physical force." Men who had survived Stalingrad, who had endured the retreat from Normandy, who had maintained discipline under the worst conditions, began weeping before they reached the serving line. The visual impact proved even more devastating than the aromatic assault. Tables covered with white cloth displayed quantities of food that exceeded the fantasies of starving German civilians. Whole roasted turkeys, golden brown and glistening with natural juices, sat alongside bowls of cranberry sauce that reflected light like rubies. Fresh vegetables, prepared with butter and cream sauces, demonstrated agricultural abundance that German agricultural experts had declared impossible under wartime conditions. The psychological effect shattered the mental defenses that had sustained German military morale through 4 years of increasing privation. Major Stoltz experienced what he described in a 1947 interview as the complete collapse of my professional worldview. Standing before the serving line, watching American cooks portion turkey with casual generosity, he understood that German strategic planning had been based on fundamental miscalculations about enemy capabilities. The abundance displayed at Camp McCain represented not American propaganda or exceptional circumstances, but routine provisioning that demonstrated resource availability beyond German comprehension. His 20 years of military logistics training became obsolete in the face of American production capacity that treated luxury foods as standard provisions for enemy prisoners. The serving process created its own psychological trauma. American guards, many of whom were barely 20 years old, distributed food portions with friendly efficiency that contrasted sharply with the grim rationing ceremonies that characterized German military life. Each prisoner received turkey portions that exceeded officers' rations in the Wehrmacht, accompanied by vegetables, bread and dairy products that German civilians had not seen since peacetime. The casual abundance destroyed the mental framework that had sustained German resistance by revealing the futility of fighting an enemy with unlimited resources. The breaking point came when prisoners realized that this abundance was routine, not exceptional. Camp McCain's kitchen staff discussed plans for Christmas dinner that would exceed even Thanksgiving's lavish provisions, while German prisoners understood that their families in the Reich were surviving on turnip soup and sawdust bread. The psychological distance between German scarcity and American abundance became unbridgeable, creating despair that penetrated deeper than military defeat. Men who had maintained hope for German victory finally understood that they had been fighting an impossible war against an enemy whose resources rendered German sacrifice meaningless. By 1:15 p.m., the emotional breakdown had spread throughout the mess hall in waves that demonstrated the collective psychological impact of American abundance. Unteroffizier Hans Beckmann, a veteran of the Russian front who had survived the siege of Leningrad, sat staring at his plate of turkey and cranberry sauce while tears streamed down his face. His squad mates, hardened soldiers who had maintained discipline through the worst conditions of the Eastern Front, abandoned military bearing and wept openly as they consumed food that reminded them of German peacetime celebrations they might never experience again. The reactions spread from table to table as prisoners shared their emotional responses to the Thanksgiving meal. Men who had not spoken of home in months began describing Christmas dinners from their childhood, comparing American abundance with memories of German prosperity that now seemed impossibly distant. The psychological effect created a cascade of emotional release that American guards observed with mixture of sympathy and bewilderment. Captain James Morrison, Camp McCain's commanding officer, later reported to Army intelligence that the Thanksgiving meal had produced more significant psychological impact than 6 months of interrogation and propaganda efforts. German officers attempted to maintain military discipline, but found their authority undermined by the obvious contrast between American generosity and German sacrifice. Major Stoltz tried to rally his men by emphasizing German military virtues and traditional values, but his words carried no conviction when spoken over plates of fresh turkey and butter-laden vegetables. The abundance at Camp McCain made German military philosophy seem like rationalization for deprivation, transforming patriotic sacrifice into evidence of leadership failure and strategic incompetence. The emotional contagion affected even the most hardened Wehrmacht veterans. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Weber, commander of a panzer regiment that had fought from Poland to Normandy, broke down completely when served a portion of turkey that exceeded his monthly meat ration as an officer in the German army. Weber's collapse devastated his subordinates, who had looked to him as symbol of German military competence and leadership. When their commander wept over American abundance, ordinary soldiers understood that German resistance had become psychologically untenable. American personnel observed the cascade effect with professional interest, documenting prisoner reactions for intelligence analysis and psychological warfare research. Military psychiatrists noted that the Thanksgiving meal achieved psychological results that traditional interrogation techniques had failed to produce, breaking down resistance and creating emotional vulnerability that facilitated intelligence gathering and cooperation programs. The abundance that Americans took for granted became a weapon more effective than direct confrontation, demonstrating the psychological impact of resource superiority in modern warfare. The psychological breakdown at Camp McCain reached the attention of American military intelligence within 48 hours, generating reports that traveled through channels from divisional headquarters to the Pentagon in Washington. Colonel Robert Hayes, Chief Intelligence Officer for the Mississippi District, submitted a detailed analysis describing how a routine Thanksgiving meal had produced more significant intelligence breakthroughs than months of conventional interrogation. German prisoners, overwhelmed by American abundance, began volunteering information about Wehrmacht capabilities, morale problems and strategic weaknesses that intelligence officers had been unable to extract through traditional methods. The implications extended far beyond Camp McCain, as American authorities recognized the psychological warfare potential of abundance displays. Military planners began incorporating abundance operations into psychological warfare doctrine, using American resource superiority as a weapon against enemy morale. The concept that luxury foods could be more effective than artillery in breaking enemy resistance challenged traditional military thinking, but produced measurable results in prisoner cooperation and intelligence gathering. The Thanksgiving meal at Camp McCain became a template for psychological operations throughout the American POW system. German military leadership, informed of prisoner reactions through Red Cross communications and intelligence channels, understood that American abundance posed strategic threats beyond industrial production capabilities. Wehrmacht morale, already strained by military reversals and supply shortages, faced additional pressure from soldiers who learned that American enemies enjoyed better food than German civilians. The psychological impact of Camp McCain's Thanksgiving meal rippled through German forces, as letters and reports described American abundance that contradicted official propaganda about enemy resource limitations. American production statistics, revealed through prisoner interrogations following the Thanksgiving meal, demonstrated strategic implications that transformed Allied planning assumptions. German intelligence had systematically underestimated American capabilities by factors ranging from 3 to 7 across all major production categories. The turkey dinner at Camp McCain represented American agricultural surplus that exceeded German food production, while American factories simultaneously outproduced German industry in every category of military equipment. The strategic balance had shifted beyond German comprehension or response capability. Policy changes emerged from the Camp McCain experience as American authorities recognized the value of abundance displays in psychological warfare operations. The Army established formal protocols for using food abundance as interrogation support, creating systematic programs that leveraged American resource superiority for intelligence gathering and prisoner cooperation. The concept that luxury could be weaponized challenged traditional military doctrine, but produced tactical advantages that enhanced American operations throughout the remaining war period. 3 days after Thanksgiving, Oberkreiter Müller wrote in his diary the entry that would later become famous among historians studying German POW psychology: "We have been fighting a war we could never win against an enemy whose abundance makes our sacrifices meaningless." The turkey dinner showed us the truth that German propaganda could never admit. America has resources so vast that they can afford generosity to enemies while their armies advance on every front. Our resistance is not heroic, it is simply ignorant of reality. Major Stoltz's transformation completed itself through systematic analysis of American capabilities revealed by the Thanksgiving experience. His professional assessment, written for German intelligence officers and later captured by American forces, concluded that German strategic planning had been based on fundamental misunderstanding of enemy resources. American abundance, demonstrated through routine prisoner feeding operations, indicated production capacity that rendered German industrial achievements insignificant. The mathematical realities of resource competition made German victory impossible regardless of tactical competence or strategic innovation. The final acceptance of American superiority spread through Camp McCain's German population like a virus, infecting even the most dedicated Nazi Party members and SS officers. Men who had maintained ideological commitment through military defeat found their beliefs eroded by daily exposure to American abundance that contradicted fundamental assumptions about capitalist weakness and resource limitations. The psychological transformation created cooperation levels that surprised American authorities and generated intelligence breakthroughs that enhanced Allied operations throughout Europe. German attempts at resistance or denial became increasingly futile as prisoners experienced American abundance in every aspect of camp life. Fresh food, clean facilities, adequate heating, and medical care exceeded the living standards of German civilians under wartime rationing. The contrast destroyed the mental framework that sustained German military culture, replacing disciplined sacrifice with recognition of American superiority in every category of national capability. Resistance became psychologically impossible when maintaining it required ignoring obvious evidence of enemy strength. The character transformation reached completion when German prisoners began actively assisting American operations, providing intelligence, technical expertise and cooperation that accelerated Allied advances and reduced American casualties. The Thanksgiving meal had initiated psychological changes that converted enemies into assets, demonstrating the strategic value of abundance as a weapon more effective than conventional military force. American generosity achieved results that artillery and bombing could not produce, transforming resistance into cooperation through overwhelming demonstration of resource superiority. In a 1952 reunion of Camp McCain personnel and former prisoners held in St. Louis, Missouri, Klaus Müller stood before an audience of American veterans and German immigrants to deliver testimony that captured the historical significance of that Thanksgiving meal. The turkey and cranberry sauce taught us what no battlefield could demonstrate, that America possessed resources so abundant that they could afford kindness to enemies. We learned that German sacrifice was not noble endurance, but the result of leadership that had challenged an impossible opponent. The meal saved our lives by showing us the truth about American power. Major Stoltz's post-war career as a logistics consultant for American corporations reflected his complete intellectual transformation from Wehrmacht officer to advocate for American industrial methods. His 1958 book, The Mathematics of Abundance, described how the Thanksgiving meal at Camp McCain had revealed production capabilities that exceeded German strategic planning assumptions. Stoltz wrote, "The cranberry sauce contained more sugar than my division received in 6 months, yet it was served casually to enemy prisoners. We had been fighting an enemy whose surplus exceeded our maximum production." The statistical summary of American capabilities, compiled from post-war production records, vindicated the psychological insights generated by Camp McCain's Thanksgiving experience. American food production during 1944 exceeded German agricultural output by ratios of 12 to 1, while simultaneously supporting military operations, Allied nations, and prisoner populations. The 847 turkeys served at Camp McCain represented 0.0001% of American turkey production that year, demonstrating abundance that rendered German wartime sacrifices tragically unnecessary. American resource superiority had made German defeat inevitable from the moment of Pearl Harbor. The universal truth about industrial warfare, revealed through the psychological impact of American abundance on German prisoners, demonstrated that modern conflicts were decided by production capacity rather than military skill or ideological commitment. The nation capable of serving fresh turkey dinners to enemy prisoners while conducting global military operations possessed strategic advantages that rendered traditional military virtues obsolete. Courage, discipline, and tactical competence became irrelevant when confronting enemies with unlimited resources and industrial superiority. The modern relevance of Camp McCain's Thanksgiving meal resonates in contemporary understanding of American global influence, where abundance continues to serve as soft power more effective than military force. The psychological impact of American prosperity on foreign populations parallels the effect of turkey dinners on German prisoners, demonstrating that resource superiority creates influence that transcends political systems and cultural differences. The tears shed in Camp McCain's mess hall in November 1944 represented recognition of American power that continues to shape international relations through abundance rather than force, generosity rather than conquest, and demonstration rather than coercion.